Hello, hello. Welcome to the new series from Blackmagic Collective, the Art Tech series. My name is John Brawley, and I'm one of the co-producers of the group. Let me tell you a little bit about the collective in case you're new here. I'm going to have to read this one over here. So the Blackmagic Collective is a filmmaker group created for and by filmmakers with a focus on education, inspiration, and networking at all levels of the industry. Our current webinars not only work to achieve these goals, but also promote inclusion throughout the filmmaking process. So that's a cool way of saying that we're all about the filmmakers, we're about the art and the craft, and we've done a lot of really cool webinars up to the date due to the COVID situation now, as well as live events all last year. So hopefully we'll get back to those one day, and we invite you all to be there. Make sure to leave a comment in the comment panels. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, I should be able to see them here. That's the best place to leave comments, and I'll try to answer as many as we can. Make sure to shout out right now and let me know where you're calling from or where you're watching from. Nobody's calling. We get people from a lot of places around the world, and we're excited to see that. So I want to thank our sponsors, first of all, off the top, Blackmagic Design and Sigma. They've been very supportive of us from the very beginning of the collective, and we're just thrilled to have them with us. So a bit about me. I am a longtime filmmaker in the industry here in Los Angeles. I actually started off back in sort of the 1987 roughly as a cinematographer. So my early days of shooting were all film or video, but a lot of film stories I can share with you. And then I transitioned, I taught myself 3D animation and got a job as a 3D animator, largely because I could bring that lighting technique and the camera technique that I knew from practical photography into the computer. And that was pretty exciting. So a lot of fun credits over those years, but I transitioned slowly back into filmmaking, which is where I am now. Producing, directing some things, still shooting, loving shooting in the digital world now, and sort of learning that process as we go. So let me tell you a little bit about this series. The Art Tech series we designed it to answer this question, or get this question answered by artisans in the industry, which is, how do you do what you do? There's so many programs like this or interviews where they talk a lot about the inspiration or where the artist came from or what their early influences were. The problem is it doesn't really get down to the brass tacks of how did you do that? And so hopefully today, being a subject of cinematography, we can actually break down to some very specific details like, how do you light that? What lights do you use? What camera do you use? So a lot of very specific things like that, which I'm very interested to know about as well. So our first guest today, I'm going to look over my notes again, is the cinematographer John Brawley. He's a great, innovative cinematographer, has worked on many, many great shows, but more recently, ones you might recognize are Queen of the South, The Resident, and most recently, Hulu's The Great. If you haven't seen that show, it's really amazing. and I highly recommend you watch it on Hulu. Let's look at a bit of it here to get us ready.
A toast to my new wife, the Empress of Russia. Huzzah!
It is...
No, you don't talk, my love.
Oh, of course. It must be an enormous responsibility and honor to lead a country of such import.
It's actually not that hard. I'm happy to hear anyone's problems with me. Don't worry about the bodies.
I would like to be useful to Russia, to help its greatness.
You will bear my heirs. There is no higher use. Rabbit!
These sticks are to enhance your fertility, but I cannot work out whether we wave them over your womb or insert them into you.
I'm pretty sure it's a wave them situation.
Together, we could create a greater Russia.
No, I rule. You serve.
Your bride is unhappy. You must clear the clouds.
We should find you a lover. It's marvelous. I like to be alone in the morning.
Now we shall greet the day together with sunny dispositions and fearless hearts.
We shall discuss whether or not to kill the Empress. She is a strange creature who I sense is at times laughing at me.
Empress, there are unhappy men here looking for a leader. If the Emperor died, Russia goes to the Empress.
Russia must be saved, and I with it.
I don't want to kill you. You're not a bad person.
I could kill you. You are a bad person.
You're funny. Treason is what we're discussing here.
It's a dangerous game.
Do not worry. All is bliss in the court of Catherine the Great.
Touche.
Do you mean touche?
This is science. Enjoy.
That's great. So again, watch it if you can. Let me introduce to you the cinematographer, John Brawley.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, John. Nice to see or meet everyone that's out there.
Yep, it's good to have you, and I'm very excited. That show is just stunning, and we'll talk more about it later. But I want to talk a little bit about the beginning, not influences, but let's talk about a little bit how you start a project off of any sort. How do you decide on your approach for lighting, your camera motion? Is there like a general process of how you get there in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to say what a great idea this is, and I really look forward to seeing the other episodes that come through down the line. I think it's great to talk a little bit more about the craft over the, I guess, the more technical aspects. In terms of establishing a process, generally, I really want to listen mostly at the beginning and hear. I mean, most of the work that I do is based on television and episodic television. So, there's a lot of voices that you hear, often even before a director becomes involved. You're talking to a showrunner, which is essentially the writer, and the producers. And usually as part of the interview process, you've gone through either reading a script. There might be a pilot that already existed, which is what had happened with The Great. They'd already shot the first episode. And so you're either maybe inheriting some choices or looking at those choices and talking about, ways and that you respond to the story. But it all comes for me out of, a reaction to story and trying to understand what the story is that you're telling. Because I think all of the other choices that you make that are kind of technical come from understanding story. So for me, the most important thing is to get inside the storyteller's head, whether that's the showrunner and then becomes the director, or on a film, usually it's more typically the director. And then just trying to then translate that understanding of thematically what the story is and what the kind of nuance of that is, and then trying to translate that into pictures. How do you represent those ideas pictorially? How do you transfer those ideas conceptually into images that kind of have that meaning? And so often what I like to do is have I'll start off with trying to understand the story as deeply as I can. And then I start trying to work up I call it a manifesto. And it's a kind of a phrase really stolen from Lars von Trier. And he had that Dogma 95 manifesto, or, if you see, there's a great documentary that he made about creative process called The Five Obstructions. and that's worth a look, because it talks about what are the kind of limitations that you want to place in a way on yourself. And it's interesting to think about setting rules for yourself. So, a show that I did a few years ago, the director and I kicked around the idea of saying, let's just shoot with one lens. Like, let's pick a focal length. Would it be a 35 mil? Would it be a 50? And let's shoot the whole show with one lens, which unfortunately we got scared of and didn't do. We ended up picking 3 lenses, but you still, you try and kind of create those ideas, and often they come out of story, that you're trying to say, how do we represent something? What is a kind of artificial limitation or parameter that we can set? And sometimes you kind of come up with really creative ways to then get around those limitations that you set for yourself. So, with a show like The Great, it might be that, okay, whenever we see Catherine, her close-ups are a little bit closer than everybody else. She's always in the middle of the frame instead of being off to the sides, because she's the center of the focus. So there's lots of ways that you could make that work. You might start saying, let's shoot close-ups first, and then we'll do wide shots at the end. If it's comedy, for example, you might think that performance is more important. So, you start trying to work up a manifesto, like a set of rules, like a playbook, and you're not always going to rigidly stick to that. Sometimes you do, but often you have to break those rules. But it just sets out an idea or an intention of where you want to go and where you want to take the visual language of what you're doing, and gives a kind of structure. And then it helps inform other choices about which cameras you're going to use, which lenses you're going to use, how you're going to light this, what is the design approach that you're looking at. So it kind of gives you a structure to build that kind of house out of, and gives you a way to kind of approach things and be able to know the answers to questions as the million questions that come up when you're doing a show as big as something like The Great.
Wow. Yeah, it's I can see that I didn't know that about The Great in terms of her close-up stuff. That I totally remember that now. But I also know that there was an intention not to focus on the beautiful environments and it's not really architecture. I mean, we're going to show it, but it's just part of the story. It's not the story. And The Resident is about moving the camera and dynamics, and all that's going to inform how you light it and what fixtures you can use and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So, with The Great, the showrunner, Tony, was really, the show is very anti-history. He doesn't want the show to be confused with your typical BBC costume drama. It's made for a different audience, and a way to signal that as much as possible. I mean, the writing, as soon as you watch it within 5 minutes, it's not one of those shows. But just visually, rather than kind of chocolate box images and dwelling on these kind of very highly crafted set piece kind of moments where everybody's positioned just perfectly and compositionally beautiful, it's a lot more haphazard, it's a lot more chaotic, and it's not about, I mean, the costumes are magnificent and wonderful, but we're not kind of fetishizing them in any way. They're just kind of by the by. We really wanted to make it like it was a contemporary show, and they just happened to be wearing these amazing opulent outfits in these amazing settings, but there was no kind of big sweeping crane shots to make show how much money we had, because it's not about that. It's really about this kind of personal relationship between a man and his wife. I mean, Tony literally said to me, this show is about a woman who wakes up one day and realizes she's in a really bad marriage. Now, it does happen that they are royals and that they're in the Russian court in 1850, but that's kind of secondary information. Same with The Resident. It's a hospital show, which is its own genre. And really, I've got to tell you this as a side note. Often when you do a show, you start doing research and you think, okay, what are the other shows that are similar in terms of tone? And I found it really hard with The Resident, because I realized that there really isn't a cinema or filmmaking, movie making equivalent to a medical show. You've got some shows that are about doctors, like Patch Adams or something, but there's no kind of filmmaking equivalent to look up when you say, okay, let's look at cinema references for doctors and nurses or medical shows. It's a little bit harder to find those, but the big thing with The Resident was we really wanted to try and have a lot of energy to it. So there's a lot of momentum. Obviously, it is life and death a lot of the time because of the scenarios that are being played out, and you want to try and heighten those and give people a little bit of respite. So there was a lot of talk about energizing the camera and making it quite frenetic, and also being realistic as well. Like, we went to a lot of trouble with the procedures to, I mean, you know, yes, we do an operation like a multi-limb transplant normally would take 17 hours in real life. You're not going to sit there for 17 hours and watch it happen. It happens in 42 minutes. But, you know, as far as we could, we tried to be very authentic and realistic with the process. And even when you're looking at a lot of the prosthetics and the components in it, it's truly very, very realistic. I mean, it was horrific. Every in pre-production, having to watch the videos that the medical advisor would show you of what that would do. It was like, I'm pretty sure though I could probably give you a heart transplant though now that
okay, well, let's put that in our hat for later. But yeah, that's one of the things, not to get off on that part of the resident, but it's watching some of those scenes. It's like, how did that look so realistic? How do you even get past, like, you know, being able to show that on TV, because we know it's fake, but boy, you can't tell. It's as if you did the operation on somebody else, but that's a scary thing. So let me jump onto one question real quick before we start getting into some specifics. And this is one that I know is kind of against the rules, but I kind of want to know the answer to this too. So maybe you can give us a little answer. So Sandy wants to know what sparked your interest in cinematography.
I think when I was a young guy, young man, my mum gave me a camera when I was very young, and I just became fascinated with taking photos and being a photographer, and I really liked the permission that it gave you to access people. You know, that it sort of meant that I could go up to someone and take a photo of them, or go into their space, and then later on, I mean, I kind of kept, I mean, it was like the first hobby or first interest that I had that I didn't get bored with. You know, photography is always rewarding, and even today it's part of my practice as a cinematographer. And then later on, when I went through college and university, I started a degree actually in photography, but as part of that we did some cinematography, some moving images. And I fell in love. I shot, my first bit of film was just some black and white reversal in a little handheld camera. And I remember just the joy of, I actually just ran around a children's playground. So I went on the swing set and down the slides and on the merry-go-round. And then I projected it to the class. There's about 40 students, and just seeing those images up on the big screen and feeling the audience react like it was a kind of a cheap roller coaster movie. I really was seduced by being able to move an audience and experience that with an audience as well. So that was it for me. So, you know, it's always been something I've been very interested in terms of, you know, making images, and it just sort of translated from the still photo into the moving images.
Great. So I want to get into technical stuff a little bit. One of the questions up here is kind of leading that way, so I'll start with that. You might know these people. I don't know whether you know Lonely Elbow Productions, but I want to know what your favorite lenses are.
All of them. I mean, I love that now. Lenses are kind of the you know, the funny thing is I came up in, like yourself, on film, and that's where I learned, you know, at the very beginning, and then transitioned into digital later on. And the funny thing is when you shoot on film, you know, there's all these differences in the film stocks, how you expose them, and even down to the labs. You know, I was in Melbourne or I was in Sydney, you'd get a different result from different cities' labs, and you'd start accounting for that. But nowadays, you know, when you buy an Alexa or a Blackmagic, you know, G2, it's the same in, you know, New York as the same as LA. So you kind of pictures end up being the same. But the way that we can affect the images now as cinematographers is through the lenses in front. And I think that's what's driven this huge demand and interest now in vintage lenses, because everyone's trying to, you know, find a way to do something that's a bit more, I hate the word organic, but that's a little bit more improvised in terms of what happens in front of the camera, because it's hard to recreate that in post. You know, the same with post. You know, if you get 120 you know, lookup tables or different effects or plugins that you get for your post, it just looks like everyone else's version of that plug. You know, you apply the plugin, it looks the same. So having a unique lens in front of it that draws the image in a unique way is one of the ways now that as cinematographers we can kind of take control of that image when we're shooting it, and you do it in a way that's hard to reproduce later on. So it makes it more maybe authentic or more unique. But that being said, I will answer the question. I mean, my recent lenses that I've really liked very recently, and I didn't expect to like them, was actually the Zeiss Supremes, which I just shot the recent 12K footage with. And I wasn't really expecting to like them. Normally, I don't like lenses that are very kind of perfect and precise, and they certainly are a very clean and nice looking image, but they do render, or the geometry of how they draw a face is very nice. A long beloved lens for me, though, is the older Zeiss Super Speeds. These are from the 80s.
Those are my favorites too.
I really like them too because they're really small and they're really fast. They're a 1.3. Focus pullers often hate them because they're not internal focusing, so you have to put a clamp on, matte box on them, and it moves, and
Yeah.
they don't like them so much. But I love them. The image is a little bit dirty, you know, it's a little not quite nice around the edges, and it's a bit textured, I guess you'd call it. But they do render in a really, really nice way. But you know, I always love trying to apply a lens logic, but it's so hard to talk about lenses because there's so many kind of esoteric and very subjective ways that people, you know, describe them. But you know, yeah, Zeiss Super Speeds would probably be one of my go-tos. And recently, the actually going back to Zeiss, the Supremes. I also love Primos actually, which are kind of Panavision's version of those primes from the 80s era. So that's just in that kind of film era as well. And interestingly, you know, I guess I've named a bunch of primes there. I tend to prefer shooting on primes. Again, maybe going back to that idea of a manifesto or a discipline, I like the idea of a set kind of focal lengths and thinking, okay, this is a 35mm shot or this is a 50mm shot. And I find with zooms, I just don't enjoy that process as much when it's, you know, 67mm or something. I guess I could limit myself to what's on the zoom. But yeah, I don't tend to. I mean, you know, you always carry zooms, but I don't tend to use them as much.
Yeah, I hear you. So, so let's jump forward a little bit now to The Resident. So we talked a little bit about how that kind of where you got that that set of rules, but it's such a fast-paced style. Did you light almost exclusively overhead, or how did you incorporate lighting into the process?
Well, I mean, these days, one of the challenges you face when you're shooting episodic TV is the speed. You know, we've got to do 8 or 9 minutes of screen time a day for weeks on end, and you need to have a way of doing that really quickly and still making it look good. So I've tried to, as much as I can for the last few shows, I kind of have been building the lighting into the set. And that means I don't have to bring stuff in. So it's a little bit faster. And, if the actors wander off into a corner, hopefully, you're not going to be seeing stuff that you shouldn't see. So, I work a lot with the art department, the set dressing department, and the production designer to try and build in as much lighting as I can. If you're looking at some of my recent shots, there's like a lot of lamps, in someone's house or something. It's because, that's kind of often how I'm lighting the sets now, because this is the great thing, since we transitioned from film to digital cameras, you can light a set with the prac lights. It used to be, you'd have a few pracs in there, but you'd have to bring in other lights to augment it because, there wasn't enough level coming out of those practical lights. But nowadays, you can light with practical lights and it can look really good. So with a show like The Resident, it's most of the time, probably 80% of the show is set in the hospital. So it's, these corridors, and we designed these kind of LED based cove lighting so we could change the color. And we also have some regular fluorescent tube style lights, although those were LEDs as well. And that's another point, actually, like, one of the big challenges with a show like The Resident is, you want to show the time of day. You're in a set day in and day out. The marks are still on the floor from 3 scenes ago on the other episode where you shot in the same corner of the room. You want to represent that it's a different time of day. And so I like using color to do that. So with The Resident, we had a kind of a night look and a day look. And even within that, we would make little changes to the light. And it was based on color, So I sort of went... we also had the set dressers put in some wall sconces and things like that. So they would come on and they would be warmer, but during the day they would be off, and we'd just have the overhead lights on in daylight mode and more sunlight coming in through the windows. Nighttime, we would change the color to be warmer. The wall sconces would come on. The level from the roof would be a lot less, and it would also be warmer. So we tried to give the audience cues as to what time of day it was. Same with The Great, You're on sets most of the time, and you don't even have lights anymore. You've only got windows, for justification of a light source. and you've got a fireplace in most rooms, and you've got candles. So to try and tell what the time of day is, it becomes really a challenge. And so in our manifesto, we said, or I came up with the idea or the logic that, in the morning, the candles are off. So if you're in a scene, the candles are off, but there's, light coming through windows. It's probably the middle of the day, morning. Then towards the afternoon, maybe 2 or 3 p.m. And we would actually get background artists or extras to come through and light the candles so you could see that this was a routine that happened in the palace. The candles would come on, and then there would be candles for, going into evening. So you'd have a dusk period where there would be still daylight coming in, but the candles are on. And then obviously for evening, it would be all candles, and you'd have some kind of version of moonlight. And again, for a set, it's really important that you can show the audience what time it is. And so I'm constantly in my script breakdowns looking at what time it is for each scene and trying to work out, okay, what's the lighting state going to be that shows that in this set for that. So, that's part of the logic. So I kind of try and set like 80% of the lighting is done by the stage itself, by the set that's built into what's there. Then, depending on what the shots are, I'm usually adding a few little supplemental things. So, it could, like in a wide shot, you almost don't need to add anything because the set will do all of the work for you. And then as someone, comes into a closer frame, you can start to just bring in something simple and very minimal. I have a very, I don't want to say lazy, but a very minimal way of lighting. I don't like building this kind of big forest of stuff because again, I'm always conscious of the speed that you need to work, and I often think that the simplest solutions actually look the best anyway. They're the fastest, and usually it's just bringing in something that's big, soft, close, say, just to supplement and augment. But most of the time you're just kind of going off what's already visually cued from a wide shot anyway.
So would you say that in both of these situations, you might start with the wide shots being more of the practical lighting or a large source lighting, and then but making sure that's going to cover you once you get to close-ups, and then when you move to close-ups, like you said, you bring in something to supplement the fill side or something like that, just to make it a little sweeter when you get closer. Is that more how you?
Absolutely, that's definitely the logic. Although I will confess that, and it's probably heretical to say this as a cinematographer, the last few shows I start with the close-ups. I actually start in here first. So, you do, in a typical day, you would obviously block the scene, where the actors are going to go. You might talk to the director about, pushing them over towards a window, or, you try and build the staging and force the staging to help you if you can. You might try and suggest a way that you could reduce the number of setups. So you're trying to work out what's the scene involved, how many setups do I need to shoot this scene? Does the director have specific ideas for particular shots? Sometimes they've got a oneer that they want to do, but let's assume that you're kind of finding the coverage as you go. I will start with the close-ups because in television, again, the speed is the thing. So I would rather burn more time on close coverage, and you've got a scene. If you're really up against it, and you've got 2 hours to get a scene. If you start with the close-ups, you've got a very good scene. And half the time you don't need the wide shots, because the wide shots in a lot of regular drama, they'll use it at the beginning of the scene to show that you're in this room, and then they'll use it at the end as a way to get out and go to the next scene. But you could easily just go straight into a close-up in a scene, and people will probably know where you are based on the history of the show, or identification of the colors through production design. So lately I've been just start with the close-ups. And you let the room establish that way, and often too it helps because there's no rehearsals in TV. It's not like they've been working on this for 6 weeks and then they've done it in the space. I mean, when you're blocking the scene, you're seeing it for the first time with the actors. The actors are doing it for the first time in that space, and they're still kind of feeling it out. So if you start with the close-ups, you actually find that by take 3 or 4, when they've changed the action and they put the cup down on a different line and move around to the other side of the table, if you shot the wide shot first, it never matches. If you're working on close-up still, you can kind of keep finessing it, and then when you've got what you want, you can back out into a wide shot, and then you're just taking stuff out of the shot. Excuse me. I find it actually is a kind of different process, but it works really well, and the actors really like it too, because they tend to come out really hard from the beginning, and they want to do a great performance. And now that they know that the close-ups are first, they sort of come out really big with their performances, and you doing all the discussion and tweaking of that with the director, and then they can kind of settle into it. And by the time, you know, the energy's dissipated because they've done the scene 17 times on a wide shot, you can't tell that their performance energy is, you know, a little bit less than when they first came out because it's in a wide shot. So, you know, there's a great logic to it, I think, and I found it works really well.
That makes a lot of sense. It does. Let's real quickly, you shared with me, and I can share with everybody too in a link from The Resident, this VR camera. We can show a bit of that. Can you just talk a little bit through what this is, and then what we're going to see, and I'll try to run it while you talk about it.
So this is an end of an episode.
Not at the beginning. I'll turn it on.
Now, but
hold on, John. I was misled to believe that I could play the clip and we can hear each other. So hang on a second.
Oh, okay.
Let me try it again, and I'll try to unmute your mic, or maybe you can do that for me. See if you can unmute your mic.
Sure.
Not at the beginning. I'll turn it on.
How's that? Hopefully you can hear me now. So this was a one-er that we did for The Resident, and the idea was to, you know, visit a few couples within the scene. And you can see that it's a VR camera attached to a Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro G2. We'll send you the link so you can actually zoom in and around. You can have a look, but it's really fun to watch. You can see the key grip behind me there, the two cast there, and if you look down in the Vimeo version of this, you can even see the shot on the screen as I'm going. This was all in a bar. And you can see there's a ring light actually attached to the front of the camera, and you'll watch me turn it on just now. I just hit the button as we were walking through for the next couple. You can see above there too, there's a couple of small soft lights that are up there just in diffusion rigs, and that was all kind of pre-rigged, but you can see all the lighting is kind of off the floor. And that's because I like to sort of keep the floor clear and free, and it enables me to walk around and get everything I need. You can see, again, up above there's a couple of light sources. You can see the boom swingers moving around behind me. We're on to our third couple now. Now this probably took like, I don't know, maybe about 40 minutes to stage. It wasn't really planned before we got there. We just kind of worked it out with the actors. It was kind of written in the script as being this kind of continuous scene, and you could have done it in cuts, and you know, no doubt we did shoot other coverage here, but the idea was to kind of master this all in the kind of one moment. You can see here that we're going to walk back over to a jukebox and reveal Mr. Zuckery here, number one on the call sheet. And again, the lighting there was me just replacing some of that jukebox there with some LED lights. And, you know, you're in a bar, so there's a lot of justification for the extra color and a bit of smoke and atmos. So, yeah, it was just a kind of a fun exercise to do. And again, fits in with The Resident because, you know, you have that kind of energized feeling of being handheld. I really like using a smaller camera like this because it means I can do little adjustments like this one here at the end, where I tilt down to his hand. That was kind of unrehearsed. That was just a moment, but that's, you know, that's a nice natural cut to see him hit that button. Excuse me. And so yeah, there's the shot. So it's fun to look at that in its VR mode because you can kind of zoom in and out and watch it a few times. So I use that technique a lot, and we would often do a scene in the emergency room. So when, you know, a patient comes in and they're diagnosing and making some calls, I would shoot it in a very similar way where I'd kind of move around, but much faster with a lot more running. But you get the idea, and because you're kind of small and agile, you can kind of move this camera around and get it and poke it into little places, and it's just very responsive. And so we kind of master it that way, almost like a moving tracking master, sort of doing some close coverage, and then we kind of would start doing regular close coverage after that, and then we'd kind of go back to a wide shot if we had time. Sometimes we wouldn't, but, you know, that kind of moving master gives you the feel of that anyway.
Yeah, great. That was really cool to see. So let's. I want to get to a bunch of great questions that are in the list, but I want to touch on a few things. If we can move to the grade a little bit. I know that one of the things that's unique about the grade is how you particularly, I don't know what the other cinematographers that do episodes are the same, but how you use camera, because I know that you use the secondary camera to cover a lot of alternate angles, so to speak. I have
I mean,
that too, so
yeah.
You let me know when I should say something.
Oh, sorry, go on.
You let me know if I should play one of them. I'll play it. But
Oh, sure. I mean, well, let's just talk about it quickly. I mean, yeah, using lots of cameras is something that's very common, especially in television, because it saves you a little bit of time. But actually, what it really does is save the actors, because they don't have to perform it as much, and you can get lots of options. I'm a little bit unusual, I think, because a lot of people that use 2 or 3 cameras will tend to shoot down the same line of action. So they'll do a medium shot and a close-up at the same time, whereas I prefer to actually cross shoot. I'd do 2 close-ups of 2 actors at the same time, and then do 2 medium shots of 2 actors at the same time, rather than 2 shots and 2 shots. So you've got a slight difference in approach there. And the reason I like to do that is because I think, and this is weird for a cinematographer, I guess, but I think it leads to a more natural performance, because the actors don't have to worry about overlapping each other. If you're shooting 2 shots and 2 shots, and there's an actor speaking off screen, they'll tend to not want the sound recorders will not want the actor talking over the top of the actor that's on camera, and so they have this very kind of stilted tennis match of doing the lines. Whereas if you cross shoot, people can overlap each other, and the continuity also matches as well. So intra-take continuity, if they're talking or kissing or whatever they're doing, it always matches. You've always got the opposing angle. So I always go in looking for that style of coverage. And then often I have a third camera, which might be a profile that gets, some details of hands, or just gets an alternate angle, and one take does one side or one take does the other side. And that way, with 2 or 3 setups, with 3 cameras doing slightly different things all the time, you all of a sudden get, 19 different shots, and it's a very kind of efficient way to get a lot of coverage. With The Great being that it was a kind of period drama, it wasn't like The Resident, where it was all kind of crazy and handheld and high stakes drama. It was a little bit more formal and considered. And so we would do a lot of more, I guess you would call it more regular, maybe more vanilla style coverage, where it was a bit more formal and a little bit more considered. But we would still, I call it kind of seasoning, or it's like adding a condiment. I would still use a handheld camera, and maybe you want to play that clip of me with the G2. It's very similar to previously in that Resident clip where you saw me running around.
Should unmute your mic if I play this and it mutes you.
Okay, I will do. Yeah.
I don't know whether it does it or not.
Okay, no problem. All right, so here's a shot of Archie. This is actually a scene that was deleted from the show, but he's looking for mushrooms, and this is how Archie gets his religious inspiration. Now you can see me working with the camera, and I'm talking to Archie, or Adam, who plays Archie there. I'm just having him reset. So he's already done the scene, half a dozen times with regular coverage, and now I've put the camera down very low. So we've sort of shot, 3 or 4 formal setups of, here we are in the woods, here's Archie picking up a mushroom, here's Archie eating one. Now I'm going in and sort of stealing all these inserts. Now, if we did this with the kind of regular coverage, it would take quite a while to get that shot. You can see I'm just moving. I'm able to put the camera right up in his face, and look at how close I am to him. And usually by this point, Adam, the actor here, has done it a few times. So he doesn't mind me doing what I'm doing here and restarting things. So originally I started doing this as a way to kind of get inserts, like, here he is picking up the mushroom, so I'll get that insert on the fly. But it naturally just turns into coverage. He'll start actually starting to eat it, and because of the prop, it takes a long time to reset. I wanted to get a few goes at him picking it before he eats it. So I had maybe 2 or 3 takes there where he picks up the mushroom, and now he's going to eat it, and I'll be able to, again, look with that camera, be able to, just get a bunch of different inserts. And because the screen rotates, I can very quickly go straight over the top of him. And this is typical, like for The Resident, for example, if I was doing any of the operating theater type scenes, being able to pivot that screen, and look at me rushing now to try and get more. So, in the time it takes to do one take, I've gotten, I don't know, I should have been counting the number of shots, but there's probably, 15 or 20 shots there by just doing this at the end and just doing these little kind of insert passes. One of my assistants in the US called it the football, because I sort of carried it, I guess, a little bit like an American style football. So it started becoming the football pass that would get done at the end. And so, it's just a really quick way to generate a lot of coverage, a lot of unorthodox and unusual scenes, and different styles of shots that aren't like, I guess, normal coverage. And the idea is that you collect a whole lot of these shots, And then in the edit, the editor can choose to use them or not. You've already got the scene. You've already got 3 or 4 setups of the kind of formal tracking shot under a tree, detail of him picking the mushroom, detail of him going down and starting to trip. And then you've got this other bunch of shots that are kind of a little bit more, and I call them a kind of condiment, like you would use a sauce or salt or pepper. You can just season the scene up a little bit by adding or cutting into these kind of very close detail kind of shots. And it just sort of gives you a bit of variety or seasoning in the edit to be able to kind of change gears and change directions and signify things. So it's a very quick way of working. And I originally started actually doing it with red cameras back when I used to shoot a lot more red. I used to have a little stripped down red Epic, and I could run around and do something very similar. But the G2 now suits me very well for that because of the way the screen pivots. I really like how I can kind of hold the screen. I can actually pivot the camera around the screen and still float the camera where I need to.
Yeah. And by the way, if you haven't seen the great, that scene is hilarious. So it makes a lot of sense once you've seen the show. Right now it looks kind of weird probably, but let's look at this other scene. And again, unmute your mic again. This is a little bit more traditional. It's an interior. So maybe talk us through this one a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is the scene actually in episode 2. We've already shot the scene with regular coverage, and again, this is just me doing a pass at the end. Now, because she moves around a lot, as I've been watching the scene, we've done this coverage last of all, so I kind of know the beats of when she moves and when they come in. And you can see the shot on the right, the monitor there, you can see the shot that's happening. So that's my focus pull-up. And notice how I'm moving around and tightening up the eye line. So as they go into that position there, I can kind of move the camera into the eye line and back out again as they move around. Now notice that the boom swinger and the focus puller, they're kind of got to be on their toes, because when I shoot this style, it's very improvised. At any point I might decide to go back onto L's face, for example, or to look at some other element. So they're always a bit nervous when I do these shots, because I don't really plan too much about where I'm going to go. I tend to just kind of wing it and freelance a little bit on the coverage. So you can see there the camera's actually pointing back. there's my poor boom swinger running around. So it's a very common kind of thing. Now notice I actually went very low when that happens. So I'll often know that he's there, and I'll try and hide him behind something. So it's always fun to try and keep a shot going that way. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it'll just work out and sometimes it doesn't. But it's a very spontaneous, energizing way to work. And it just goes against the kind of normal formal style. And now the editor and the director has a choice about when to use those moments. If they want to have a moment where there's a kind of revelation, they can kind of go to this kind of more energized handheld, or they can use the more formally, traditionally shot coverage as well.
So the shots that were done in traditional coverage, as you say, were they more like a slightly wider mediums and more?
Exactly, yeah. It was like mediums, close-ups, exactly. And there was a pretty sure, if I remember, there was a dolly that was kind of correcting as she was moving around. So it was more, more traditional way you would shoot a scene like that. Also notice too, there was no lighting on the floor. There was no stands or hardware. There was just people that can move around and get out of shot. And that's because, again, that lighting approach, that was a set. I've got a window there. There's a bunch of tungsten light coming in through that window, through some shears, which act as a natural softening diffuser. There you go. That's the same room actually, but you can see. Hey, and notice those candles aren't lit. That must mean it's in the morning, right? You've got some hard light coming in through the windows there, but there's a kind of a sheer or lace or heavy curtain there that softens that a little bit. But there's no other hardware, in that space. And that just means that the camera is a bit more free to roam, and the actors are free to roam as well. They can kind of improvise a little bit more. And I really like giving the actors that ability to feel like it looks like more like a real set. It looks more like a real bedroom there. This is actually her bedroom set there. I really like to work that way. And it just kind of makes it all flow a little bit faster and a little bit more nicely on set. I feel like one of our jobs as a DP on a show is to create a space for the actors to be able to work in, but actually all of the crew to be able to work in, including the director, and do it in a way that is not doesn't bring kind of anxiety and tension. There's a lot of old school filmmaking that involves a lot of yelling, and this kind of very alpha male sort of shouty drill sergeant kind of mentality. And I just don't think that's the best way to get the best out of actors. Maybe if you're making Full Metal Jacket or something, but 99% of the time it's much nicer if you have a more calm working space and you don't have all this kind of gack and gear everywhere. So I'm always constantly trying to minimize, make the camera smaller, make it simpler, have less machinery, and just kind of get out of the way. I want to be an observer. I want to see what the actors are doing. I want to create a nice space for them, and I want them, if they want to do more takes, that we've got time to do it. That's kind of what drives a lot of my decision making through that kind of the prism of that manifesto that we've created, to try and kind of make a nice space for the actors to work in and do their best.
Great. Just a question from me real quickly, and then we're going to get on to a question from somebody else. If you look at that shot, or you look at something like this shot, let's get back to this one because it's easier to see. What are you using on fill side for this? You have the window light, that's the key, but do you have something up in the ceiling that's sort of filling in that?
No, I mean, a lot of the time it's for this, in this room, it was nothing, because, you've got on that window, there were 3 9 light or 9 by 1000 watt globes in a maxi. So it's like a grid of 9 lights. There's 3 of those bashing through that window. And often I would also use a couple of mole beams, which are a very highly collimated beam of light. So you can get 5 or 10K tungsten mole beams, and it's just this very hot, searing light that projects a long way into the set. And so I try and find open a little gap in the curtains and just smack a little mole beam from outside the stage, and just put a little bit of even harder light on the wall, say in the background, just to give it some texture. And in a wide shot, the ambience of all of that light coming through the window would bounce off the set and would be enough, because there's enough dynamic range in the cameras now. When I come into something closer, if you go back to that shot, what I would maybe do would be to walk, and in fact, I think you can see it, there's a bit of poly there. So you see that dark edge with the in front of the chair, and you can see it's squared off. That's actually a piece of 4x4 poly or white bounce. And so that looks like one of my gaffers guys, it looks like Lee maybe, who's walking that piece of poly around. So as the camera moves around, there's a bit of poly, and it's just bouncing a little bit of that light back. So I tend to use what's called very passive fill. I don't use active fill. It's not powered or lit. It's just bounce, bits of white card that kind of we move around with the camera that just return a little bit of that light that's all coming in through the window. So it's a very naturalistic approach. It's not a pictorial approach at all. It's a bit more, I came from a more documentary, low budget way of working, and I guess that's where some of those techniques come from. I don't tend to use a lot of lights and a lot of hardware because I'm just too impatient. I just want to shoot, and I'd rather get more takes rather than spend a couple of hours making something look perfect, which I know probably is detrimental to the photography if you're just talking about the lighting itself. But to me, the momentum and the energy of working is actually what's important, and just feeling like you're exploring the work and telling that story. I want to try and do that as much as possible, and not bring in all of this kind of stuff that slows things down.
That's
like
great.
Lighting.
I don't need lighting anymore.
So you do use light, but you're setting up this space, and you're trying to stage. Like when we're staging that scene, if you go back to the photo, I wouldn't try and stage. If she was standing next to a wall, I wouldn't be saying I'd be saying to the director, "Hey, can we put her into the middle of the room, or can she move out into towards the window so that she's kind of she's looking after us by standing in the right light where the room is lit." So I tend to light the space and not the person. And then you stage it so that the person knows that if they stand in this area, they're lit. And the wonderful actors, most of them are pretty vain. If you say, "Hey, you look really great," if you stand over there, funnily enough, that's where they want to go when they're blocking the scenes. And and you don't even need to. You just do that for a couple of weeks, and half the time they know. They'll just go towards the light. They're like moths, so they'll just move over there, and they'll take care of themselves. So, and then that way, half your job is done because you've lit the space. They all stand in the right spot, and you just need to take care of a couple of things here and there. So it's not that you're not lighting; you're just kind of creating the best chance that the set is already doing the lighting for you.
Yeah. So William had a long question that we covered a lot of, but one of the things we didn't touch on, maybe we can just touch on briefly, is what you talk about when lenses you use. What do you have a preference in cameras that you use generally? Or I know the great use Alexa and the or somebody
Yeah.
right?
I like to think of myself as camera agnostic, and it really annoys a lot of my camera department because I carry a lot of cameras. I don't use just one camera, and that's because I like building different cameras to do different jobs. So if I'm doing a little handheld run around camera, that's why I like that little G2, because I can make that camera really small and I can run around and get shots with it. But then I'll use a full-size Alexa for some of the shots because it's on a remote head, and I like the look of that camera. So it really just depends on each job. I'm about to start a job that'll very likely be Sony Venice because we've done some camera tests. We've looked at the results, and talking with the director and the production designer, that's the image that we liked the most. So I think the whole kind of brand ism is a bit I think a long time ago I realized that often if you get obsessed with the technology and the numbers and the specs, it's not really about that, because you're trying to apply that information to telling a story. So that's really what's important, not the actual numbers or whether it's got the most of this or that, or it's really about the aesthetic, the creative result that you get, and how you apply that to an actual storytelling moment. So I end up carrying a lot of cameras because I'll use different cameras for different things. It used to be that it was quite hard to match cameras within a scene, but if you look at the great, and the resonant is probably the same, I'd say about 70% of the great on my episodes, I didn't shoot all the episodes, but on my episodes, about 70% of the edit is Alexa, and about 30% is Blackmagic G2. I know that the other cinematographer, Maya Zamojda, also did use it to maybe not exactly the same degree, but she certainly did use it a lot, that kind of ratio. Again, you have a kind of principal main camera, and then, I tend to have a lot of other little cameras. And, I carry little Olympus cameras that have got a very nice image stabilizer. They're even smaller again than a Blackmagic. So if I'm, doing something that requires a really tiny camera, then I'll go to that camera. So I always think that I don't want to kind of ever call out a particular brand, because I actually don't even really own cameras. I've got some Blackmagic cameras only because I've sort of been left with the prototypes after I've been testing them. But otherwise, I just rent the ones that will be best for the job, because I think that's how you should do it. If someone said to me, hey, we want to shoot on an iPhone, then that's what we'll use. I just think it comes out of story a lot of the time, and that pre-production process. And I always enjoy, that's one of the things I enjoy most about starting another show, is like, okay, how are we going to approach shooting it? Which cameras are we going to use? Which lens package are we going to pair with those cameras to get that result?
Great. We're almost out of time. Let me try to hit one more question that is, again, getting us back into that area of not the tech, but wider. We'll go back out to the master shot right now.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to know this too. What was your big break in the industry? What got you from the point of doing, because you've done a lot of shorts early in your career, a lot of indie stuff, like a lot of us younger, and I'm going to call myself a younger cinematographer, experience-wise. But then you got into those great opportunities like Queen of the South.
Yeah.
And so what was that big break?
I shot a lot of short films. I was working at the time at a camera rental company that supplies equipment, and the owner of that company was kind of a mentor to me, and he encouraged me to take cameras out on the weekend. And so I was shooting a lot of short films and working with as many people as I could. And one of those directors that I did a short film with, 3 years later, came back and had this very low budget comedy series that I ended up shooting. So that was kind of that was called Lowdown. That was technically my first, I guess, real job. And at the time, the production designer that worked on that show, as well as one of the actors, were working on another show that a very well-known Australian producer, John Edwards, was working on, called Offspring, which is now, still to this day is a popular show. It's on Netflix now, and a lot of Americans have started watching it and discovering it. But it was really that was actually my big break, was doing Offspring. And I think a little bit, John Edwards is a great producer. He's done 100 shows, and he has a great mentality, and I sort of try and do the same thing. He likes to blood. He calls it blooding new crews. So he'll have 4 directors, and one of them will be doing it for the first time. And of his HODs, the designer, the DP, wardrobe, one of those he'll be giving a break to, and he tries to do that as a way to develop new talent. But it's selfish because he's bringing in the new ideas. And so, of course, when I interviewed to do Offspring, no one had really done much shooting with red. The pilot for Offspring had been shot on a f900, a 230-inch camera. So I came in and was like, well, you need to shoot it on a red. And, I told them all the things that were wrong about the pilot. And I think they appreciated, in a way, the honesty that I had in my interview, and maybe the confidence.
There's a 50-50 thing there, whether they're going to appreciate it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and they gave me a chance, and I guess I didn't stuff it up. Yeah, maybe it was just the bravura of being young and not having failed before. So I just kind of took some chances, and it worked out really well. And that's where I kind of learned my craft, I guess. I did that show for I think there's 7 seasons. I think I did 6 or 5.5 or 6 of those seasons. And yeah, that was my opportunity, but it also taught me a lot. I mean, when I got that job, I was still thinking I was going to go and shoot movies, but I really realized how much I enjoy the form of television, and how, TV at the time was just starting to come into its own with streaming. Now you could watch TV without ads. You could also binge watch a show, and you could realize that you could have much more sophisticated storytelling when you have 10 episodes or 12 episodes of an arc with more complex characters. And so now I'm almost exclusively working in television because I really enjoy that form, and that's what that taught me as well. So
yeah, when I was doing a lot of visual effects, we kind of got into that binge thing, and it was a nightmare for visual effects because it would never close episodes, but everything would stay open because it was fluid until they got them all shot. And do you find yourself in that kind of world, going back and shooting pickups for episodes that you shot months ago just because everything's still open?
I want to pat myself on the back a little bit. Usually, because of the way we talked about already with the shooting of it, there's usually not stuff that gets left behind in terms of stuff, unless there's a creative reason that they change the writing of it. So most of the time there's not a lot of pickups, and I kind of take that as a point of pride. But like on The Great, for example, because they're delivering it all at once. Yeah, I mean, I was grading the last 2 episodes, and it was in lockdown, so I was trying to watch it on my television at home, which is not a precision monitor, and trying to kind of give grading notes, and it was going to be on air within a couple of weeks. And so that is hard. You feel the pressure of that, and sometimes you're seeing little mistakes that are probably not going to get fixed in time because of the VFX type things where you want to paint something out or see something that shouldn't be there. That pressure is difficult, but I actually, part of me also enjoys that tempo, and I think that's something that television brings now. Is there's a certain kind of pace of working, and I think that's something I really enjoy doing.
That's great. Okay, one last question we're going to slip in here before we're done. Let me put the question up. So RM Film wants to know when you deviate, because I guess he's considering what the description of shooting The Great was sort of redlining, but when do you decide you can shift off that but not have conflicting styles within the same project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think it goes back to your manifesto. If you have an approach to lighting and using techniques like that Rembrandt lighting, which is, having something that's lit but something dark behind it, for example. If you're trying to do that all the time, sometimes you can be successful and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't always win, but you might be aspiring to do that all the time. But I think that sometimes those choices get forced upon you because you've got to make a call sheet. And I think this will sound pretty cynical, but a lot of the time I think the reason I get employed is because I have a pretty good track record when the producers ring the producers from the last show I worked on about not doing a lot of overtime. And to me, that's what's important, is you have to deliver a result that has to look good, but the performances have got to be good, and you kind of, cost the production more money, because that counts as well. That's part of your responsibility. You can't just be like, I'm just here to make this look good no matter what the cost is. And I think you have to be a little bit, or take on a little bit of that responsibility anyway. But yeah, I mean, I love trying to maintain a visual aesthetic. If you make a choice about how you're going to light something like that, to try and keep it going, but you can't always maintain it either. So sometimes you have to lose. But that's the challenge. It's like, okay, how am I gonna fit what I'm trying to go for here? That's in my manifesto. How many of the 10 listed items am I going to be able to hit in this one scene? And that's the creative challenge. That's what's fun about it. That's what's what you're trying to work out and find a way to do it. And I like empowering the crew to help me with that too. Rather than trying to kind of dictate that all from the top. I try and involve the crew as much as I can. My operators, the gaffer, the grips, they all have some ownership of those ideas, and they all know what we're trying to go for, so they can instinctively move towards it as well. So that helps you out too.
That's wonderful. Well, I guess our time is up now. John, there's a million questions we all can probably ask you, but I appreciate you joining us. And I know you're up north in quarantine right now on your waiting to get
Yes, that's right. So this is my first post-corona project. Fingers crossed that it actually happens. I'm just in quarantine here for another 10 days. I'm in the far northern part of Ontario, and in about 10 days we'll be allowed out. I'm just doing a film here with Philip Noyce, who's an Australian director that I've worked with a couple of times before, and Naomi Watts, another Australian. It's just kind of coincidental that there's all these Australians doing a show here in Canada. But yeah, hopefully it'll work out.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we hope to talk with you again sometime soon.
Excellent. And thanks for having me, and I really appreciate the initiative as well. I think this is a great idea.
Great. Thanks, John. All right. That's our show right now. Two things of note. Number one, I think it's next week, is our All Access webinar or panel, which is All Access is about, it's a series for and by disabled filmmakers. So it's a fascinating look at how not only disabled filmmakers work in the industry with us, but also we want to start incorporating everybody together as one big collective. So if you're very interested in that, make sure to kind of take a look at the webinar. They're both online, past ones, as well as some of the new ones. And then our next event for the Art Tech series is in September, and it's with Jill. I'm going to always kill her last name. Actually, I wrote it down. Where did I write it down here? Jill Bogdanowicz. She was the colorist on The Joker and amongst many other films, and she's excellent colorist at Company 3. She's going to join us and talk a lot about her technique. So make sure to join us then, and thank you for being with us.